Hello again. Game crashed, so had to reboot, and I'm back again a bit later. So I've got the launch vehicle here on the pad, and I'm waiting for relative inclination to come down to about 0. So I think it's roughly like 24 hours after it went up, because the Earth will rotate, through a full orbit, full day underneath the path of the orbit. This could be. I'm pretty sure that other launch was during the daytime. So this is probably about a day afterwards. So it doesn't matter where the actual craft is, because where the actual station is will be entirely dependent on its orbital period relative to the day length of things. But I really just want to end up on the same track as it, and then I can worry about rendezvousing with it afterwards. So the most critical thing, it's different from stock, is getting your relative inclination as close to 0 as possible. As inclination changes are extremely expensive. Everything is scaled up in real solar system, but so here goes the station overhead. So we're 8 degrees out, so it's not a good time to launch, even though it's relatively nearby. The important thing is ending up in the exact same orbital track as it. So I'm just waiting for this to come down to 0. Now, in one of my previous attempts, when I had the bugged version of this contract, I got to like 0.1, a little under 0.1 degrees, which is great. You should really kind of practice and aim for rendezvous like that. Whether if it requires getting practice or changing, writing cost code for yourself, a KOS code, or even altering the craft, so making stages larger or smaller, so that you just have more control over it where you want it. In practice, if you can get to a really low relative inclination like that, to about 0.1 degree or something, oh great. So I got as close as I'm going to get, it looks like. It got down to 1.3 degrees, and then it started increasing. So I'm just going to let it warp another second or two to make sure that is increasing. Yep, that wasn't a weird glitch. All right, so I've got to go to orbit. This is where it is, at the ground, but I can change my relative inclination through my launch. But with the really low relative inclination I had in that previous attempt, I was able to rendezvous and dock for under like 200 or 300 meters per second of delta V. So that's obviously you can do better. Obviously you can do worse, but I'd suggest for your first attempt or two not leaving yourself less than that in whatever you set up for a service module for your craft. It looks like, unless these numbers are crazy, which they certainly could be, my service module, because I switched this over to burn more efficient fuels. Previously, the service module for my 2-person craft was burning HTP, peroxide. So I just, kind of an interesting interim service module I was using, and right now I'm using kind of a Gemini type craft. I think it comes from Tantaris. But anyway, it doesn't matter exactly how I built this up. You want some delta V in your service module, and I have almost 2 kilometers per second in it, which is sufficient. Let's see, and so on its own, it could, we could do a mission of 10 days or so, but with the resources that went up with the station, these guys can stay in orbit for like a month or so, which is the goal of the contract. So let's see, we should have a space for 4. Okay, obviously, so launch a new vessel, check, orbit, launch a space station and place it in orbit. See, I would expect this to be checked off and everything. It's a really complicated contract, which is part of what makes it difficult to write and part of what makes it difficult to test. Because it has to do, in the contract creator code, it has to do all these checks on the different vessels. So first it has to make sure, did you launch a valid space station? Is it in the right orbit? And then it has to do checks against the properties of this craft, and then you have to get them rendezvoused. So anyway, and I'm not sure if the bullet points if it's a flow, like one has to complete before the other, but right now I'll just focus on the launch, and then I'll look into that either between videos or after this launch. We'll see how it goes. But what's most important here is to keep this relative inclination as low as possible. Now in this case, I'm lucky, because I designed my craft to have so much delta V in that service module. It means I can't carry as many people, can't carry as many life support supplies, etc., etc. Oof, really losing relative inclination there. So I'll have to do the inclination attempts further along the track. Let's see. So because I'm so close down here, I can't really figure out where my ascending and descending nodes are. Let's see, I'm definitely pitched a little higher than I want to be. I should have noted it down. But if I recall correctly, the orbit I established was, what, let's say about 450 by 450, something like that, or 470 maybe. And so that's what I want to hit. Probably actually, like literally having written that down, probably would have been a smart thing to do, because I know that's what I did on my previous one. Because you want to get precisely, you want to match a lot of things, which is just really tricky in real solar system. Like a lot of people are proud, and rightfully so, of just achieving orbit for the first time, let alone like bringing back any hardware or bringing back people. Like rendezvous and docking are, like, I'd say another kind of order of magnitude of difficulty, right? If you find going from stock to, there we go, to real solar system to be a challenge, it's even more of a challenge to get any rendezvous and docking done in RSS, or realism overhaul, or RP-0, etc. Because just all of these factors, limiting factors, so high g-forces, when these pop out, we should see that decrease when these stages run out. And there we go. So yeah, we hit a really high altitude with those first booster stages, so I'll have to arc down to compensate for that. But I can't throttle engines pretty much for anything. I cannot relight things for the most part. It takes so much more delta V. The plane change is so much more difficult, or more expensive in terms of delta V. And you don't have reaction wheels, which is another really challenging thing in real solar system. So that's why docking, rendezvous and docking is kind of one of my favorite challenges of real solar system realism overhaul. In fact, whenever I plan a lunar mission, it's a bit crazy, but I like to set up my mission such that it requires me to launch two separate things from the surface and then dock them in orbit before I can carry out my mission. There are good reasons that historically they plan not to do that, but it's just another interesting challenge. So it looks like no matter which way I angle, I'm not getting a reduction in my inclination. So I'm going to have to wait until I'm a bit further along. I might actually have to spend that whole inclination change of 1.5 degrees, which is huge. In my previous attempt, I did it similar to so historically, if you look up the Gemini Gina docking, so they would launch one, as I mentioned in the previous video, and then like within minutes, once the first one, either the Agena or the Gemini, reached orbit, they sent the other one within minutes. So they were launching at basically the same time, so the relative inclination was pretty close to zero. And I did that with my previous attempt. And I could probably try a similar thing, but it's just not very historic. Like, it's not really how station stuff was done. Usually a station was sent up, and then days or weeks or months later you send up a crew. But it looks like this is being more of a challenge of making it more difficult to get the same inclination as the station. So I'm just kind of pivoting back and forth just to see which direction that number moves in. Back and forth relative to the yellow tick here. So maybe I should have waited another day or two or week or two before attempting this launch. And I might end up doing that, or at least for any future attempt to rendezvous with the station. So now that I've kind of kept my angle down substantially, let's try to angle it a bit higher so I can start to reach that altitude. So what was it? It was 470. That's pretty high relative to most missions. Like in a real solar system now, the atmosphere ends at 150 kilometers up. So I'll usually keep my orbits between about 180 or 200 or something. So it takes a good bit more energy to get up that extra bit. But of course, these R7 craft have a lot of these Soviet-designed. Soviet-style designs have a lot of delta V. They can produce a lot of energy, although that limits your payload, various balances and such. Okay, So I'll stay above the angle here. Oh, there we go. I must have clicked too many times. I lost my relative inclination. So right now, the station is around the back side of the planet. I'm still off by 1.5 degrees, which is huge. So maybe I'll be able to show simply that I can't make this rendezvous due to the delta V requirements, but we will see. Who knows? It's a big challenge, so I don't want to unrealistically show exactly perfect steps. I think there's a lot of value in a video that doesn't do an attempt that doesn't do things absolutely perfectly, because honestly, when you're trying to do it for your first time, it's not going to be absolutely perfect either. So I finally got it below 1.3, but that seems to be about it. Doesn't look like it's going to go any further. Nope. So yeah, that might be, so if you just let the station go once around, again, I don't understand orbital mechanics all that well, but, well, I can see we're in pretty parallel tracks. So that's the first obvious sign of what's going on. I do want to be angled a bit higher, although, no, maybe I don't, because of that time. See, this stage, it's a short burn stage, and I'm surprised I was able to hit that, the station last attempt that I made. But so here, if those numbers are about the same, that number is not going to decrease 1 second per second. So I need them to end at about the same time, or else my point isn't the point that your engine burns out at, whatever altitude you're at, isn't going to be the high point or the low point of anything. It's going to be an intermediate. You get this weird elliptical shaped orbit when you don't burn out when you're at your periapsis or your apoapsis. Okay, so yeah, that's still in the future. I need to bring that down. So I'm gonna have to use a lot of the energy in this service module in order to match the orbits, but that's okay. It's because I might end up at like a 300 by 470 orbit. So let's see, any chance that I can get below 1.3 degrees? No, it just doesn't look like it's going to happen. So I've got these parallel orbits, basically. So I could arc so that I cross it. And obviously at some point, because we're not off a huge amount, at some point my orbit is going to cross it, and that's the point where we're going to do what I call the inclination change. So that's where we change the inclination of our orbit to match the same inclination of the other one. That might also have happened because I was kind of losing control of that craft as it was going up. I was pitching a bit above or a bit below. So it could be my fault in putting up the station that caused it to be that way. Don't know. Oh, so stage is very, very nearly burned out. And we're definitely still heading uphill a little bit. Oh, wow. Didn't even make orbit. That's impressive. So I'm going to have to use the service module to achieve orbit here. But thankfully, it's a pretty powerful service module as far as service modules go. It has a thrust of 0.11 g, and so that's going to be sufficient to help us round out this orbit. So I'm going to get it above 150 or 200 or something like that, and do I want to keep angling up like that? No, let's just go straight prograde. I just want to get it out of the atmosphere enough, so that has to be my periapsis has to be above 150. So this is just getting the this craft. The goal is to rendezvous this craft, so you can see this is how much mass we ended up getting in orbit with it. And I will, should I raise that? Not yet, no. I want to get some certain things precise. So the first thing I'm going to set up is see what the inclination change is going to cost me, because no matter what, if I want to rendezvous with that, I have to match inclination. That is fact number one. So let's see, maneuver planner. So obviously there's plenty of way, there's definitely manual ways you can do this. Just, I love the shorthand of these tools. So I want to not intercept, match planes. Sure, let's try that. There's another way to do it though, actually, through the rendezvous planner. Rendezvous planner is kind of cool, actually. So I already have that in my target set, rendezvous planner. So there we go. So I didn't even have to write down the orbit. It's showing that my station is in 470 by 470. I tweaked it so it was precisely that. So I want to have the same, so line planes. So look at that. That is, if my service module was like this, like the real Soyuz, which it has like 2 or 3, maybe 400 meters per second in total of delta V, I'd be hooped. There's no way you'd want to waste half of your fuel just to do that. So just to match inclination. So this would be in an aborted mission. But thankfully, so you can see, you can even do the math, right? So 175 meters per second to make what looks like a small inclination change. So you can see why you'd want to get as exactly close to that. And that's about what I was at the ground. So I perhaps shouldn't have launched if that was the lowest I could get it. I should have waited for another orbit around or two, or maybe made an adjustment to the inclination of the station, something like that. So let's see. I've got RCS. Oh no, these are real. I believe these are considered real engines. So I think MechJeb will be able to do this. So execute next node. Okay. And I've got solar panels all the way around it, so it should be able to maintain power somewhat. I shouldn't run out of power quite yet. It looks like I've got 13 days of power, judging by what this tool is saying. Okay, so it's going to split the difference. Good. So it's estimating the burn time because they're real engines and I'm not relying on the RCS to do it. And so it's going to burn 2.5 minutes, starting about half of that time ahead, and then the other half before. Come on, start up engines, and then I'm going to just time accelerate through. So I'm going to match that inclination, and then I'm going to do a little bit of like planning or figuring out between this video and the next one. So this is a huge plane change to have to make, and this is from KSE from Florida, which is relatively close to the equator. If you compare it to like a Soviet launch site. You'd have to, this orbital path would be much more inclined if I was actually launching from a Soviet location. Also, it's interesting to consider that both launches out of the United States from what 2, 3, 4 different locations nowadays, because there was the shuttle out of the U.S. and the Soyuz out of Russia or Kazakhstan. Both of them had to be able to make it to the station. They couldn't just, it's not like everything was being launched out of the same latitude, out of the same inclination, that same location. There we go. So we matched planes. So now it says relative inclination is 0. So the next thing is, oh, that's actually not too bad. So the next thing I'm going to want to do is, as I clicked, is intercept with a Hohmann transfer. Oh, wow. I totally fluked out. I'm not entirely sure if I'll use... Interesting. So sometimes I find this tool is a little bit of a crapshoot, although that might just be because of how I usually do it. So Hohmann transfer is the way you'd normally try to match Mars. So notice, or Venus, if you're doing a transfer to another planet, you just do a big burn all at once at the right time, and then no more burns. You just kind of coast out to your goal. And so notice how the Hohmann transfer it's set up is a long way away. It's about a day away. So normally I would set up what I'd call phasing orbits. And that's sort of what this is doing. We're just at different orbits. So because I'm below the station, I'll discuss most of this in the next video because this video is already starting to get long. But it looks like we're going to be able to match it pretty nicely. So I'll see you in the next video.